can't live like this anymore. I've got to realise that actually I matter, and I'm getting emotional now, but like I matter, and you know, ultimately everybody matters. I've died on my sword because of this before, but this is how I operate. I feel like you've worked really, really hard. You've got yourself to a position where you're sat around that boardroom table. You can't go in there and keep the seat warm. Like, that's not going to drive change for the business. You have to, you know, put your head above the parapet and say, this isn't right. This is my reasons why. This is what, you know, not based on what I want to happen, but what's right for the business. That's why you're there.
Hello, workplace innovators of the world. Welcome back to Workplace Visionaries, a podcast that gets real about the present and future of how people work. I'm Jane Young from Hubstar, and in this episode, I'm joined by my co-host, Jo Harris, in a conversation with Bex Moorhouse. And today we're talking about how we can create inspiring workplaces in which people can be the best version of themselves, speak up for what they believe in, drive change, and evolve cultures that take better care of the human beings that comprise them. If you asked employees anonymously how they feel on a Sunday night about going to work the next day, their answer would tell you a lot about whether there's something in your culture that you need to fix. That is just one of a whole bunch of takeaways from Bex in this episode. So I think you're going to find this conversation a breath of fresh air, because Bex just brings so much energy and authenticity to the conversation around all things workplace and the future of work. As founder of corporate wellbeing consultancy Invigorate Spaces and an instigator of change, Bex has helped companies like Nike, Converse, Facebook, TripAdvisor, 20th Century Fox, and a whole bunch of others breathe life into their workplaces by curating better spaces and building better experiences and cultures that put wellbeing at the heart of it all. And as you listen to this episode, I want you to just feel a fresh sense of hope and optimism that even just one person can make a huge difference to workplace culture, to leadership behaviour, and ultimately to performance. So don't miss this one. If you're in the thick of developing or executing your workplace strategy, I think you'll find plenty of nuggets in there. Thanks for listening. Bex Moorhouse, welcome to the show.
So excited, by the way.
For being here. We're very excited too. So I was going to start off by asking you about, you grew up in Wales, didn't you?
I did,
so
yeah.
I'm from Shetland, so I'm also down with the country kids. So I was just thinking we could get rolling with, could you paint a picture of what it was like for you growing up and how you think that shaped you, and maybe even shaped your perspectives on built environments and workplace experience and culture and all your stuff?
Do you know what's really funny? I was literally talking about this yesterday with someone else, because I grew up in this tiny little place in mid Wales, which is called Knighton. Got a shout out to Knighton. But it's just tiny. I think at the time when I was born there, I think it was like 1,500 people there. That was it. Yeah. And there was zero diversity. There was like farming community, no real big brands or anything like that in the town. I think Spar was probably the biggest brand that was in the town. And so it really shaped me in the sense of like really valuing community and really valuing the simple things about life, like, you know, admiring the countryside, you know, going out as much as I could with my parents, obviously, to kind of touch into other locations and see other things. But it also made me realise there's got to be more out there. Like, I need to see other people. I need to learn about different cultures. I want to explore. I want different types of foods, like all of that stuff that I didn't get at home. It kind of set me on a bit of a mission to find it, really. And there's obviously massive perks about living in a small community. People look after you. People check that, you know, if your curtains don't open at a certain time in the morning, people realise that like something's happened and send the ambulance or try and knock the door down or whatever it might be. But there's also other sides of it, which is like small-mindedness sometimes, which I don't tolerate well, I don't think. I wanted to have more, I don't know, equity in the world, more inclusion and all these things that I'm like super passionate about. And I didn't find that in my little community. So that's why I set about moving on, really. So yeah. How was Shetland? That's kind of the same.
Shetland was, I mean, people always think Shetland's closer to the UK than it actually is because they drag it on in to fit on the weather map. But it's actually halfway between Scotland and Norway. So that was a very a similar experience in the sense that everybody looks out for each other. Like I took it for granted actually, because I never left Shetland until I was 21, and it was software that made me leave and go to the big smoke of London. But I was so ready for that. I was also sort of craving those more diverse experiences and just the bright lights, and it was all just really exciting and really good fun. But yeah, it was definitely that safety net. You know, there's at any given point in time, if something went wrong, it would just either be automatically fixed by someone. You know, your car lights bust, you'd come out the door and it's done. Or, you know, it'd be a blizzard and you'd be driving 30 miles in the dark blizzard with one other car passing you, and then they just come back to check that you're all right. And, you know, that kind of thing. And or just even having like, even more than that, probably 10 places that you could live if you needed to at any point in time. And the other thing, I'd be interested to hear if you had the same experience. Going to London from there, I always felt like an outsider in a good way, like being able to look in on it. And I found it quite hilarious, actually. I remember going to like businessy events and things, which was such a different planet. To put it in context, I remember walking across the road after getting a job in the software company in Shetland, the only software company, with a laptop bag. And I walked across the road, and just having that laptop bag was enough for the passing traffic to wind their windows down and go, ooh. And then I was in London, these big fancy events and doing all this businessy stuff. And I remember just going into the toilets and just laughing and thinking it was just hilarious. And so I had that outside seeing it differently perspective. Did you have that too?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I remember I went from Wales to Hull to university. So I went up north to university. And this sounds really stupid now when I say it out loud, but this was the reality. I stood on the wrong side of the road to get the bus. So like the bus dropped me off in the morning to university. It was like a campus university, like the first day. So I went back to where it dropped me off, because to me, logic tells you, you know, the bus is going to pick you up from where it dropped you off. And like somebody said, no, you're going into town that way. Like you need to cross over like with the traffic. I'd never been on like a proper bus. Yeah. Like, you know, and there were so many weird things, like the library just seemed so huge, like in comparison to what I was used to, like, you know, like the old windy sort of like aisles in the library. And I remember just going, you could live in here. Like this is like, you know what I mean? It's such a massive place. And it made you appreciate like the benefits of both locations, I suppose. Do you know what I mean? And then moving to London, I found it really difficult at the start not to talk on the tube. Like I'd be like, oh, I love your top, or God, that looks a really interesting book. And obviously nobody wants to have that chat. Yeah.
I can imagine as a Londoner, that was probably a very awkward situation that you put someone else in. Oh my God, a stranger's talking to me. In London, we don't really talk to strangers, so we get told that at school. Right? This is completely out of the ordinary. So I guess you had a blank look at your face.
100%. And I couldn't understand, you know, like silly little things. And I had it this morning, like my train went to the wrong place and I had to get off and go on the tube, and I don't usually. And I had that thing where it's logical I would get off the tube to let other people off. But this lady was like, well, that was very kind of you. And I was like, that's just normal, isn't it? But like, obviously people don't. They're like, they're all out for themselves. So it's very different. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It is good to have that outsider perspective, I think, because you probably notice things that you might not otherwise notice and you might take for granted.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why I always keep saying all the time about like the feeling of community and the feeling of belonging to something is just, that can happen anywhere. You get that in cities, you get that in countryside, and you can find it anywhere. You've just got to look for it and hunt it out. And once you feel like you belong somewhere, it's like me and my boyfriend, I said the other day to him, I think we could live anywhere because we just sort of make the best of any place we're in, basically. Yeah.
But you did end up, you ended up working with quite a fancy roster of companies. I mean, Nike and Capgemini, Disney, Facebook. I saw 20th Century Fox. But what I loved as well is how open that you've been about the pressure that you put on yourself when you're in those roles. I think I read on your site that you had this thread that kept coming up of nothing will fail because of me, which I very much relate to on a personal level. For one thing, it's this kind of largely self-imposed, not entirely, pressure to perform, you know, to sacrifice, whether it's not taking holidays or not taking time off when you're sick, or missing family events, or sacrificing your hobbies, the things you love to do, and all that. So it was very inspiring to hear that you managed to change that burnout fest behavior and mindset, and you decided to be, I think it was positively selfish, you called it. So I'm curious to hear, how did you make that change, and what happened?
Oh.
And was it like a lightning bolt? Was it gradual? Was it a particular moment?
Do you know what? It's a weird thing, because I don't know how you, well, I know that you two are the same as me in the sense of growth mindset, actually, I should say that. But I've always had a growth mindset, and I've always been trying to be better at whatever I do, whatever that might be. And throughout my whole life, I think I've been really tough on myself, if I'm being honest, in the sense of I've always sort of, don't know where it comes from, but I've always felt like I wasn't good enough. So if I was, like, say at the start of my career, especially when I was more on the FM side, you know, as a woman being in FM, you weren't really treated as, you know, an equal per se at the very start. I'm talking, you know, 25, 30 years ago kind of thing. And I felt like I had to be better than a man to be able to be treated as, you know, good at my job. Mm-hmm. That wasn't, I don't think, society telling that. That was also with me. I have to take ownership for the fact that sat with me as well. But it continued to drive me all the time, where it was like, if somebody said something about HVAC system at that time and I didn't know it, I would go off and research. And we didn't have chat GPT or anything like that then. So that was a lot, right? And then the next meeting I'd show up and I'd be informed, and I'd know what they were telling me. Was it accurate? Were they overselling something to me? Because that happened regularly, where it was a woman receiving a quote and it was oversold kind of thing. So it was all of that, and it's still a journey, and I still find myself, especially like now doing the contract work, like I go and work with particular companies for certain periods, and they can always find another contractor, right? So you're in that point where you're constantly trying to prove yourself and kind of do the best work that you can. So it's definitely been a journey, but I realized really early on that I always put myself at the bottom of the list. I always looked after others before me. And my family, sort of, my mum in particular, she's got that running through her. She's still exactly the same today. My mum would do anything for anybody. And I just thought, I can't live like this anymore. I've got to realise that actually I matter. And so I'm getting emotional now, but like, I matter. And, you know, ultimately everybody matters. Everybody has the opportunity to have a lunch break, to take the dog to walk in the morning, or take their kids to school, whatever it might be. Everybody deserves that, and nobody should be in this hamster wheel of thinking that, you know, I'm not enough and I need to do more and more, because it's just not a healthy existence. And over the years I've learned that, like, joy for me happens in those moments where they're just insignificant, really. Like, it's not about a job title, it's not about accolades of all the businesses that I've worked with. Like, yes, I'm truly grateful for all of the amazing experiences that I've had, but actually I want to be a good person. Do you know what I mean? I want to show up well for my family and friends, and that doesn't happen when you're in a burnout cycle over and over again. So yeah.
How did you recognize that you were in the cycle? Do you remember?
Do you know what? This is a bit of a strange one. So you both know I'm like big into fitness, and somebody said to me, why are you always doing like high intensity workouts all the time? And I was like, because I love it. Like, get in there an hour, like smash out a workout and get on to the next thing. And like, that's how I was living my life. And they went, you never walk anywhere. And I was like, what do you mean I never walk anywhere? They said, in the office, you going somewhere, like it's all about the destination. And it just sat with me. And I was like, do you know what? Everything. I'm like a high adrenaline person. Like, I'm running on this, I don't know, running on this treadmill. Everything I'm doing is full speed. And then what gets left behind is just before holiday, you get exhausted, and then you spend the first 3 or 4 days of your holiday lying on the sunbed, knackered, you know? So it was kind of somebody saying that to me, and then also that realization of like digging into what actually drives all of that. And at the heart of it is that feeling of, you know, I could be replaced. I might not be enough. I need to do more and more. And that is like unhealthy. And that's the bit that I've kind of been working through. So, and I definitely fall back into it. So I'd love to be able to say, oh, you know, I'm reformed. George. I'm not like that. Yeah. But I fall back into it. And I feel like sometimes, you know, the other day watching the marathon, I was thinking, I've got a marathon in me. And then I'm thinking, I haven't got a marathon in me. Like, I'm 45. Do you know what I mean? I'm busy enough. Why do I think I've got a marathon in me? But it's just this weird thing. And you have to rain check yourself on that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So it's a combination of practical stuff, like just remembering to say no to things, and just scheduling your time, I suppose, in a different way, or dealing with your time in a different way. But it seems to be more, it's not so much even the practical stuff, is it? It's that ability to just say that I'm enough, I've done enough, put it away, and I'm worth it, and I'm here for a reason. And it's almost like just reminding yourself of those things. Would that be your advice to people, or do you have
I think so. And also, like, why do we talk to ourselves in such a negative way? There's things you say to yourself that you would never say to somebody walking down the street or somebody, you know. So I think it's that whole piece of, you know, there's many worse things I could be. Like, I feel like I'm a pretty good person. Like, do you know what I mean? If I was to hand on heart say I'm a pretty good person, don't go out of my way to pee anyone off or to upset anyone or anything like that. Like, that's enough. Do you know what I mean? I think sometimes society, you know, makes you compare other situations or see what else, you know, what everyone else is up to, and put you on this path to, like, I need to do that. Well, you don't. There's nothing. You get to choose your life. You know, I don't have children. That was a conscious choice. Society tells me I should have children. I picked not to. That's okay. Like, do you know what I mean? I think there should be less judgments on the way people choose to live their lives. And I think everyone would probably be happier if they did that, to be honest, you know, just live their life authentically how they want to. God, we've got very deep here, guys, haven't we?
Quite quickly, I knew we would.
That's great. I mean, it's something that I think a lot of people do struggle with, Bex, is this kind of imposter syndrome, as you're describing there. And I suppose, you know, you're obviously advising a lot of leaders in terms of, you know, how to create kind of healthy, happy workplaces. And, you know, in my perspective, I think you're one of the best in the industry at doing that. How much of this is affecting, you think, overall workplace well-being, kind of this feeling of, well, maybe I'm not good enough, or this imposter syndrome from an individual level? And how can leaders kind of help encourage people to, I suppose, you know, banish those demons away, if that makes sense? I mean, what can they do from a wellness perspective to help with some of these more personal anxieties?
Yeah, I think, do you know what? It's having conversations and building up that space that people feel trust, like there's trust in that space. They feel psychological safety and they can kind of share their truth. But actually, the places where I've seen it be really successful is when the manager or the leader turns around and says, I really struggle with this. Like, how many managers say, you know, there might be a big talk they've got to do the next week or whatever. You don't really hear managers going, oh, I'm nervous about that. They're very much like, oh, yeah, it's just a talk. Whatever they're feeling inside, they're keeping that to themselves. They're not sharing that. But actually sharing that humility and that, you know, I'm not perfect myself really helps to create that environment where everybody feels okay about it. You know, I definitely, at the start of my career, never told anybody anything. All the anxiety I was facing, all the challenges I was facing, I just pushed it down. It was like, keep moving, get through it, you're going to be fine. But actually, then I was referred to, I remember once in a job, as a machine. Like, they said, she's the machine. And I remember feeling at the time like, wow, like, that's really good. They think I'm a machine. Like, that's not good. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the problem, is that when the leader doesn't create that psychological safety and share their truth, then it doesn't create that really good environment where you can kind of be happy and healthy together. And silly little things like leaders not taking lunch breaks, leaders sending messages out of hours, like, people will respond to that because you're their boss, like, they're your boss basically. So you're going to respond. And yes, it's okay for leaders to say, well, they don't have to, I set guardrails, You'd be pretty stupid to not reply to your boss, you know? So it's all these little things that can add up and stack up. And if somebody's undergoing stress or anxiety at work, these little things mount up. And if they've got nowhere to release that, then it either comes out in behaviours which aren't appropriate behaviours, or it could be like proper mental health challenges that are happening for people outside of work. So I think having those conversations and creating that space for a conversation is probably the number one most important thing I think that leaders can do.
Yeah, just normalising that humanity in a way, and being quite comfortable to be vulnerable and to show that you don't have to have this old school leader gravitas of invincibility.
No. Yeah. And, you know, like, there's so many life events that happen for everybody. And yes, you don't always want to tell everybody your life events that happen, because sometimes they're not good. It could be grief that you're going through. It could be, you know, heartbreak, anything that's happened in your life. But having a leader or a manager that you can just turn around to and say, I actually had a really bad week last week, or I lost my husband 6 months ago and I still feel really bad today about it. Like, that's the kind of workplaces that I want to foster and I want to be part of. And I'm sure everybody else does as well. Places that actually care, and it's not about getting that report out because an exec needs the report. It's about the leader, holding the fire and saying, we will get it to you as soon as we can. But unfortunately, someone in my team has had a life event that's been really catastrophic for them, and we're trying to work through it. And we'll get it to you as quickly as we can, but it's not going to happen like straight away. And I think sometimes leaders don't sort of stop that coming down. Like I always think of that image of a leader is like the umbrella. They're supposed to be stopping the rain and, and what I mean, protecting their employees underneath rather than just fanning messages back up all the time.
Yeah.
It's a really good visualization, really, because I think that, for a lot of organizations, there's a bit of a desire to be labeled as high performance and always output driven. And so there's almost a natural tendency to be like kind of putting more hours in, you're kind of working outside of the normal working hours, that you talk about kind of managers skipping lunch breaks. I don't know whether this was like someone watched that film with Gordon Gekko, Lunches for Wimps, that's kind of the type of persona they want to put out there. But to your point, it's a lot, being high performance also means taking care of people's emotional needs and well-being and protecting them and nurturing them so that, they can perform to that high optimum standard because they feel emotionally secure and they have that trust and autonomy in their leadership. And it's just so important as you're describing there. I mean, I love that analogy of the umbrella, like protecting the people below. That's a great picture to paint really in terms of what a good leader can do for the people that's working with them.
Yeah, I just think, there's a lot of people who get into leadership roles because it attracts the pay and it attracts the perks of leadership, but they don't really want to coach or inspire or drive performance within their teams. And so having more of those subject matter expert roles in organizations as well, I think is really helpful because then those people who maybe don't want to be a leader can still progress. But then the people who are natural coaches, want to inspire people, get the best out of them, they're going to then sit in those leadership roles to be able to drive the right behaviour. And going back to that high performance angle, by the way, I'm so pleased, Joe, that you didn't say productivity because that's my pet peeve at the moment. I hate the term productivity. It's all about performance. But high performance is managing your own well-being to be able to perform at a high level. It doesn't mean consistently operating up here. And I think that's the challenge in the corporate world. When I think back to sports outside of work, you'd never run a marathon the day before you're going to run the marathon, so to speak. But in the corporate world, we expect everyone to operate up here all the time. We don't factor in like deloads or tapering, as it's called in the sports world, before, so you do a massive project, you should taper exactly the same as you would in a sports world. You should reduce your workload, relax a little bit, refuel, recharge, then go again. But we don't encourage that for some reason.
That's so true.
Yeah. So when I work with teams, I always say, think about your capacity planning, think about ramping up to it, because otherwise you're going to get exhausted people that are working for you. And then the quality, the output, everything about that piece of work is not going to be where it needs to be, basically.
Yeah. And do you think people are misinterpreting psychological safety, what it is and what it means? Because I think I heard you say something, maybe it was one of your posts about, this is a safe space, but what we actually want surely is a brave space. And that struck a chord with me because I think psychological safety is very open to interpretation and maybe some interpretations could do more harm than good. And I kind of worry that there's an inclination to over sanitize or to standardize behavior and language and interaction, probably with the best of intentions, but to the point that there's maybe not enough bandwidth for human error and even personality and fun and messing up because there's a preoccupation with that interpretation of safety. And the other weird thing about it is that that sort of interpretation requires this intense focus on yourself. You really have to focus on how you're coming across and whether you're complying with expectations to prevent anybody being upset and whether you're towing all the lines. And that means you can't really fully engage naturally with other people, and especially in the workplace, not to mention that focus on the self is kind of the definition of self-consciousness. And I've heard psychologists say there's very little difference between intensely focusing on yourself and being depressed. And that a great way to overcome social anxiety as well is to focus on very intently on the other person and not yourself. So it strikes me that I'd rather be brave than be safe, to your point, if I'm getting the interpretation of your point right. And I'd rather cultivate courage and openness and than remove any risk from my environment, because otherwise there's just surely no way of building resilience and having that vulnerability and having creative conflict and messing up and learning and laughing and being human. So just interested to hear what you think about that and what you think a brave space is.
Yeah.
What might that look like and feel like, and how can leaders create them?
Yeah. Oh, I love this, because I've been in so many boardrooms where everybody nods and everybody agrees with what's said, and then you leave the boardroom, and if it wasn't your meeting, you were just an attendee, so to speak. That's when the conversation starts. Oh, I didn't agree with that. Oh, that should have been this, and and all of that. And it just shows that there isn't that psychological safety in the room, and that actually there's unhealthy peace. So this term of unhealthy peace is about, we're all just going to nod along and then we're going to go off and we're going to do our own thing, which isn't what you want. You want to foster this space where people speak up, even if their voice is like, creaking, so to speak. They just say their truth and that's it. And there are no ramifications for that. And they're saying it because as a leader, I think you have to always assume positive intent. You have to assume that somebody's saying it not to be nasty to you or to the team or anything like that, but they're saying it because they really mean it, and they think that by saying it, it's going to make a difference. So the worst response when somebody vocalizes a challenge or an issue or whatever is to go, well, I don't think that's right. No. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. And I find a lot that people meet something with, well, at least it's not as bad as. So, if you have a phrase of something like, I don't know, trying to think of a scenario. I can't even think of a scenario, but like a scenario happens and then somebody says to you, well, at least it's not X. Like, it could have been worse, basically. There is zero empathy in that comment whatsoever, because you haven't felt what I'm feeling today. Like, this is terrible for me. I've taken the opportunity to tell you and you've just said, well, at least it isn't as bad as whoever over here. So these kind of small nuances and language and the way that we treat each other are just really, really important. And they're different. They're the difference between like creating an end product that has everyone's opinion on it is going to be way better than a product that a leader is just driven through.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's the thing. And I've done a post about this, but just a live example. I remember in my Nike days, I was running full out and, set up a run race for the whole organization. And a girl in the meeting said to me, what if it rains? And I was like, what do you mean, what if it rains? I was like, we're an apparel business. Have you seen our apparel? And I just dismissed her, like literally like that. And we carried on going through all the planning, like what's going to happen, how it's going to operate. There was like walking for people that didn't want to run, like the whole thing, trying to make it inclusive. And at the end, I just was like, what if it rains? Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm so sorry. I was thinking my prejudice, I'd go out in the rain. So everybody else, therefore, is going to do that, right? Not everybody's me. And if I always dismiss people, I'm never going to get a product at the end that's going to fit everybody, be, thoughtful for everybody, etc. And you know what? I left that room and I said to her, I'm so sorry. Like sometimes you have this like chimp or something, I don't know what it is. It just throws out something. And it's like, it's okay to have those behaviours as long as you address it and change your behaviour. Do you know what I mean? It's not okay to apologise and just do it again. Do you know what I mean? You have to, and people will respect you for that. Like, everybody is human. But yeah, sorry, I feel that was a long-winded answer. But
no, that was really interesting, and it made me think, especially when you're describing that boardroom situation where nobody wants to speak up, that there must be a lot of people in that position with decisions around hybrid work, because it seems like a lot of people, in terms of hybrid policy specifically, they're kind of going along with things, and maybe some of it's driven by the CEO's worldview, which is like, oh well, we just kind of have to do that, and they don't really necessarily agree with it. And so but what advice would you give to a workplace leader? I mean, even sometimes quite senior people, maybe a VP of CRE who's in that situation. You know, do they speak up? If so, how? And what would you say to the people who are really kind of living with a lot of cognitive dissonance, I guess, because they're maybe staying quiet or implementing things that they feel are not the best plan or even detrimental, but they're kind of going with the flow? And what advice would you give those people?
Do you know what? This is really hard, and I've got to say, I've died on my sword because of this before, but this is how I operate. I feel like you've worked really, really hard. You've got yourself to a position where you're sat around that boardroom table. You can't go in there and keep the seat warm. Like, that's not going to drive change for the business. You have to, you know, put your head above the parapet and say, this isn't right. This is my reasons why. This is what, you know, not based on what I want to happen, but what's right for the business. That's why you're there. Like, that's why you're in that role. And you should be able to say, I don't, you know, at the end of the day, not every decision that you argue against or disagree with is going to go ahead. But the fact that you've stood by your guns and you've said what you think is right for the business, I think is something that every leader should be doing. It's not easy, but otherwise you're keeping a seat warm and you're not changing a culture and you're not improving the lives of everybody that comes after you. You know, the whole way I've operated any business I've worked in, especially when I was like on client side and with a client, it was like a baton. It's like someone passes me the baton, I take over, I try to make it better. But at the end of the day, I'm not holding that baton for the next 15 years. I've got to hand it on really quickly to someone else who's got the energy to finish what I started, you know? And I think that's the thing, is people get comfortable in roles, in positions, follow a process to stay where they stay, but they're not driving change for the employees, for stakeholders, for the people that really matter, you know. And I think it's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but I would rather stay with my morals and be with that, and know that I've been true to myself and to the people that are underneath me or, you know, across the boardroom table from me, than to just agree to somebody that isn't seeing it from another angle, basically.
I think that's some really good advice there. I mean, we hosted a series of roundtables, and I think, Bex, you came to the first one we did, actually, and this topic came up kind of time and time again, really, around a lot of corporate real estate and workplace leaders kind of feeling pressure from above to change, you know, things like perhaps the workplace policies, or let's drop the M word in the mandate, and they felt uncomfortable with that for various reasons, and they felt like they weren't being listened to, and felt like a little bit like in between two bickering parents almost, really, of you know, one wants one thing and the other wants the other, and you know, they basically don't feel like their opinion can be heard. So I think the advice you're giving there, I think, is really quite, you know, actionable as a takeaway in terms of, you know, making the point on behalf of the organisation, on behalf of the business. And you know, there's countless leaders we've spoken to who feel very much in an awkward position right now, where they feel like the leaders are wanting people in the office more, but their staff or their employees for the organisation quite like the flexibility and the work-life balance. And you've got the head of workplace or head of real estate kind of in the middle of that and trying to make everyone happy. And it's a very difficult position, I think, to be in. So I suppose, that being said, what advice would you give for leaders, particularly kind of that are involved in that crosshair, if you like?
Do you know, with this one, it's a difficult thing, because there's no cut and dry approach for every business. But I have been surprised that most organisations aren't reflecting on what their brand is to decide what their ways of working will be. You know, if you're a community-based business and you're all about the community, you need a front door. Otherwise, how are people going to find you? Like, people need to be there. Like, if it's a, I don't know, community initiative or something, people need to be able to walk in, see your team, get the support they need, feel part of something. You need a premises. If you're a software company who is all about pushing the software out, doing all that, why do you need a physical office? Like, you kind of don't. And I think the challenge comes is that the operating model, when we had to flip straight because of COVID, there was a risk. So people just did that, moved into that space. The unwinding of that is much harder, right? Because there's no risk anymore. There's no crisis, no thing. So no one's going to be fully supportive of suddenly having that autonomy disappear. And then we add on the next layer where a lot of leadership are male, white males might not have childcaring responsibilities in the sense of maybe their wife does that, or they've got, nannies for that. So it's easy to go to the office because that's where they used to walk up and down and feel part of something. That was their tribe. And, when they walk down, if they're still going into the office and they walk down it, there's no one there, then they don't feel like they're part of anything anymore. So I think it's trying to understand all parts of the argument or the disagreement and try to come to a collective viewpoint, but also operating on a team level. That's the main thing. You can't have an approach across a business and go, this is it, everybody. Because if you think about all the different functions in a business, especially the type of businesses that I work with, they all do completely different things. So how can you decide, like, okay, well, we're a creative company, that means you've got to collaborate. Well, creativity could be digital creativity. It could be anything, community engagement. It could be anything that doesn't need you to physically be in an office. So, yeah, I think it's brand identity. What values do you want to have in terms of that? And then how do your teams want to operate, and that co-creation back and forth? Sounds really simple, doesn't it? But clearly it's not.
No, especially at scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was interested hearing you mentioned the productivity thing, because I remember you also, when we were at the mosh pit it was quite a few Friday nights ago. I remember you calling that out, this sort of obsession with productivity, which is great, because I'm paraphrasing a bit, but you're pointing out that, ticking off 100 tasks doesn't mean you're having an impact. And today we have so much talk about focusing on output, not things like time in the office and clocking hours and presence and all that, but even focusing on output can be dodgy ground, can't it? If we get really too focused on just squeezing every last drop out of people. So I'm just really interested to hear more about your views on productivity and how we can rethink pace and just focus on meaningful, impactful work in a way that's still palatable for these kind of high performance leaders.
Yeah. Do you know what I always think? And again, there's always someone who comes up with this like framework and says, oh, you can measure it in this way, or like, da, 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 da. But you can't really. It's like some of the things that you do within your day to day are just intangible. Like the way you make someone feel, no survey is going to be able to say, well, Bex was in the office today and she made me feel amazing, or Bex was in the office today and she made my life hell. Do you know what I mean? Nobody sees that. So performance is more around what you're doing and how you're doing it, and what behaviors are you doing and how are you making people feel, and all those lovely things that sit around that. Are you inspiring people to go, do you know what, I see you as the next director of X, and you're a manager today, and you could be a director, and that person goes, do you think I could really do that? 100% you could. Imagine the impact of that. Like that stuff that fuels me. The whole productivity is about, well, he over there or she over there is better than me because she's done 100 tasks, but actually 100 of those tasks were less impactful than the one thing I did. The one thing I did today was just sit with someone and say, I heard about your daughter being ill. Are you okay? Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what type of workplace are we trying to create? We want to create human workplaces where people are at the center. And then the crazy thing is that when people feel seen, heard and valued, they automatically perform better. And the extra stuff of like, I don't mind logging on at 8 a.m. because I've got a call with Sydney, because you know what, my manager really appreciates me and values me, and therefore I do that every day of the week for her. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what all of that is about. It's about, performing and being a nice person as you do it. Do you know what I mean? And compassionate, caring, and I keep saying it, but inspiration, I think, it's imperative as a leader. Like, when I was at Nike, this is I can't believe I'm saying this on a podcast, but anyway, I said to my team, one of my girls, she was so stressed out one day, she was in tears, and I walked in, I was like, what on earth's going on? Like, I was concerned. And she said, oh, I've got this shipment of boots that I haven't got out in time, and they were going to Wayne Rooney at the time. And I said, right, well, don't worry about that, because we can get a flight sorted for someone to physically take it in their hand luggage or whatever. So there's always a way around stuff. Don't panic or whatever. And I said to her, we're selling shoes. Like, nobody has died. Do you know what I mean? Like, pull yourself together. We had a very good rapport. I wouldn't say that to everybody, like, pull yourself together, but it was like, let's get some perspective. Like, we're just selling shoes. Do you know what I mean? Irrespective of everything else, like, nobody's died. We can sort it out. We're the dream team. We can get it done. And like, that is what keeps people going, because sometimes when you're in something, it feels so like everything feels so serious, and it's not. Like, you've got to try and keep it light.
I think that's where, from yourself, as your side, Bex, is that you bring in this huge amount of empathy into the role and into the team. And I suppose, if I was the person on the other end of that, I'd be like, well, great, I've got someone who understands the challenges I've got and will be much more willing to kind of ask for help, and will feel like we can kind of win together as a team. And I think that's a very kind of inspirational story, as you say there. I do think as well that a lot of organisations, I think, are struggling with kind of this obsession of, we want to retain our staff, etc., without actually thinking of the very basic fundamental thing there, which is what you're talking about, is the trust and the togetherness and the empathy that obviously you instill as a leader. And these are kind of key factors, because I think if people feel like they're part of that team and they have that kind of resonance with their colleagues, then they're much more likely to stay there longer, and they're much more likely to thrive and the organisation to benefit as a result. So kind of in these stories you're saying, I think there's huge amounts of value there in terms of how can a leader become much more well-rounded and empathetic to the needs of their team members there.
Do you know, if leaders don't sit with their staff and ask what drives them, anything that they share, if they don't do that, is counterproductive, really. Because if you think about it, I might value salary. I might be in a good financial position, so salary might not be important to me. Flexibility, as an example, might be really important. So if you say to me, okay, new job, it's going to be 20 grand pay rise, whatever it might be, and this is it, I might just be like, no, I don't want it. I value being able to shut off at night, 5 o'clock, leave my work at the office or wherever I'm logging in, and that's it. So I think understanding what drives and motivates your staff to then decide what benefits, packages, etc. that you do as well is also really important, because many people will go, I would want a pay rise, therefore you must want a pay rise. It's not the case for everyone. Like, again, back in my team at Nike, we did summer hours. So on a Friday, you could finish at 12. So people were commuting into the office and finishing at 12 and then commuting back. So I just said to the team, like, let's look at this again. What if we took a Friday off instead? So we worked it out on a rota, so you could have the full day, so you don't have to come in to then go home. Maybe we could work that out. You'd end up with a less, it would work out even, but basically just a bit of organisation and planning. You'd have to work when you're in the office with less people. How do you feel about it? And they were all like, oh my God, this is amazing. Can we do it? I said, we can do it until someone stops us. Do you know what I mean? We were doing what we needed to do, but it was like, and then before I'd even got there, FM was not allowed to do summer hours because there needed to be someone there. Well, what message does that send out for the employees, that because you're in FM, you're not allowed to do the same as everybody else? Do you know what I mean? But it's like thinking practically around, we've still got to run the business, we've still got to deliver everything we've got to do, but there's got to be a way that we can make it so that everybody feels a bit of the perk and everybody feels part of something that's bigger than just the task that they've got to do.
That's a great example. I mean, I met with a company last week. They were a software business, actually, so obviously not in obviously consumer retail, but they trialed a 4-day week just after COVID, actually, on a short-term basis. So the head of people kind of put that in, and that then became a permanent fixture. So now they are operating at a full 4-day week, and Friday is basically kind of the business is on standby. And I was fascinated, really, because I suppose I've seen kind of trials in the media and so on. I've never actually come across a business that's their basic operating model. So what they have is they've got colleagues that are on standby. So if anything does happen, so if something goes wrong, there's someone that they can call and they can be stood up. But what they've said is that they've compressed all their actually just word, Bex, productivity or output into the 4 days. And they said that they were extremely productive during that time. And then on the Friday, they're just then freed up to be able to do obviously whatever they want to do. And they've said that they've not lost a single member of staff since they put that in. For them, retention was absolutely everything. The development of the products gone leaps and bounds. The profitability has ballooned as well as a result. And so the leadership is saying this has been one of the best things they've ever done. So it's quite fascinating, really, this concept that you see kind of in the media. Whether it would work on say, night basis, obviously they've got shops and retail and so on. But obviously you wouldn't want to have closed on a Friday. You'd want to sell some of those trainers, wouldn't you? But
100%.
Fascinating concept.
Yeah, it's good. And I think just thinking outside of the box, like work really hasn't changed in years and years and years. And like COVID happened and it forced a change. And again, when I was back at Nike, I think I had like a future work strategy and it was like 2030. We thought it was going to implement by. When COVID happened, everything that we had in that strategy happened. We wanted to encourage more home working. It was all part of the plan to reduce our overheads in terms of, buildings that we had, but also to be good citizens, like corporate citizens, in the sense of I think, again, people don't talk about this enough, but buildings are a real big drain in terms of sustainability. So we shouldn't be trying to get more of them. Do you know what I mean? Like we should be actually trying to reduce it down as well to be good corporate citizens. So yeah, I think it's reflecting on what your organisation wants to be, what it wants to be known for, and then thinking through those working practices after. And if a 4-day week attracts the right type of talent, why wouldn't you do it or consider it at least?
Yeah, there's also an argument to say in terms of supply and demand of labour and market forces that there will be no choice but to reduce the working week as AI takes on more. I've had people sort of refer to that, which is an interesting way to think about it. But in some ways, we seem to be still suffering from this never-ending hangover from the Winslow Taylor scientific management days. The productivity and the sort of top-down thing, and we've just never, we've not really gotten over that. And I remember reading an article, I think it was 2012. So maybe it was even earlier than that. And it was from the HBR, and it said, was it called First Let's Fire All the Managers? And it was about the Morningstar Tomato Company, who were innovative self-managed company in California, a very successful tomato producer. And then I started looking into self-management, and they had factories where people chose their working hours. And you couldn't have that in a factory. We need the machines to work. Well, yeah, the people know that. Do you know what I mean? They're adults and they understand their job and they know what needs to be done and they figure it out for themselves and they talk to their colleagues. And so it was just very interesting to read about that then. And it seemed very crazy then. And there were other pioneers of it, like I think Ricardo Semler in the 70s. These guys that had set up these self-managed companies, and you think that seemed so mad then. And it just doesn't seem so mad now, does it?
No. Like at the end of the day, all the things that bring joy in your life are like curiosity, innovation, like those things are just so important. Asking why, like, why are we doing this? Is it driving any value? Is it not? The number one reason why people are stressed at work is because of bad capacity planning. They feel like their workloads are too bad. But actually, how much of that workload is stuff that nobody's looking at either? Reports. I mean, it blows my mind the amount of reports that get sent around a business that just land in people's inboxes and they don't even look at. Like personally, anywhere I've worked where I've had to do reporting, I've always said, it's story time. Come and join me for an hour and I'll walk you through the report. I'm not just emailing it to you, because data can be misinterpreted, like the whole thing that goes with it, and people need to be able to ask questions and get familiar with that data as well. So I think that's the other piece is, just understanding that everyone takes in information differently, receives information differently, and if you're not bringing everybody together to go through stuff like that, you can end up with some random reporting or a random identification of what is in that report, basically.
Do you think some of that kind of creation of reports and kind of sending messages, etc., is around this innate kind of personal desire to be present, or presenteeism, if you like? So perhaps if you're working in a hybrid organisation, you feel like if you're not sending out these reports that may or may not get read, you don't feel like you exist in that sense. So, I mean, how much of it do you think plays into that desire on a personal level?
I think it's really difficult because, again, it gets back to that. Most organisations are obsessing over productivity, so it's like a tick box. You're going, oh well, I've done 10 reports this week, or I've done however many, but nobody's talking about the value that they're bringing, or the change that comes off it. So I think that's the thing, is we're busy fools a lot in corporate world. Like, you know, silly little things like meetings in your diary, especially in the big corporates that I end up working with. I mean, you could have a meeting about a meeting, like literally, oh, we're going to have a meeting to socialize the idea, to go to another. If you were to total that up, the amount of money that's been spent on one of those meetings that then happens duplicate, triplicate times before the actual thing. And then when you get into the actual meeting, the senior stakeholder doesn't even ask for the deck that you've built, or talks about a completely different thing. What a waste, you know. And the inefficiencies in that, I think, are things that we should be looking at more. Like, what could you take off your plate? Like, how could you work better to be more efficient? And how do you want to work? And then not forgetting that how I want to work also has to work with everybody else. So I can't start at 12 because I just feel like I need to do all my morning routine before I start, because that's going to affect everybody else. You know, I've got to be cognizant of that. But maybe I could start at 10, nobody would notice, and then I could do my run, get my fuel in right, and do whatever I need to do, you know. And I think there's a lot around standardization and doing things for doing sake. And I think we should sort of like slow down to actually be able to go forward with things that drive impact.
Yeah, I think as you were talking there, like it's like the reminder of the curse of the 30-minute Teams call. You know, it's so many of those calls there that perhaps could have been solved another way. And maybe I think we're all struggling, I think, for how to work together as organisations and teams in this hybrid world. And I mean, some of the examples I think are really great for people to see if they've not seen it before, like Atlassian and some of the things they talk about in their future of work. So I just saw this morning, actually, it was a talk by Molly Sands, who's part of that team there. And what they do there is they have basically a document or document-led collaboration. So with that report or presentation deck, that's created with everyone's input. And then what she says is that they start the meeting and then she says, right, everyone, cameras off. And we're going to come back on in 10 minutes. Everyone reads that document, so they're all literally on the same page. Then they open up and then they are basically, right, what's the discussion points? Where's the decision points? Let's get the action, and then we're done. And so you almost have to have that rigor around, well, how are we actually planning to meet? If we're just going to get on a call and just discuss and chat, and then no one's read the document, we're not going to make the progress. You're going to have the time run out, and then you're no further forward. So I do think this is very difficult. A lot of organisations are struggling with this, and there's not one right way. We just have to figure out what's best for the task at hand, I suppose.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's also like not jump into the wrong understanding of a situation. Like I've heard, like not on this contract that I'm on previous contracts I've been on, I heard someone say, oh well, you know, her dot's always on red. Like, as in, no, hang on. What is it when you're away from your desk? Whatever the dot is on Teams, like her dot's always on whatever. And I was like, does she do the work? And the person was like, yeah, quality of work. Good luck to her. Well done. Do you know what I mean? If she's working 2 hours a day and bossing it, I mean, this person was bossing it. Why are we obsessing over like whether she's got a light on or a light off? You know, like I just think there's a lot of nonsense in the system that it doesn't help, you know. And the one thing that I feel brave today, she's made me feel very brave, so I'm going to say it. But one of the things people don't talk about is what happens when you're also in the office. Like in the sense of, I'm all for going in the office. But one thing I've consciously realised is you see bad behaviours a lot. The gossips at the water cooler, so to speak, the backstabbing, the moaning about X, Y, Z, the whatever, all of this stuff. When you're at home, you see none of that. So you think your colleagues are like unbelievable people, like they show up for meetings, they're excited, all of that. You don't see any of that like off because they're on show, right? So they turn up, they're present, they're doing all those things. In the office, you see all their like over familiarity of stuff that you're like, it's a different place to what I thought I was working in. Do you know what I mean? But nobody actually talks about that.
I actually haven't had anyone talk about that.
No. But it's like those things, like I said the other day, I was at a talk and I said, and somebody called me out for it after. So I did think, I probably shouldn't have said that. But I said, I love people, but I don't love Debbie in finance. Now, there is no Debbie in finance, right? But what my point is I love people, but there's some people in any team you're in that just drain the bejesus out of you. Why do I want to sit next to them every day? If I'm at home, I can manage my energy. I can manage like who I interact with. And do you know what? For 30 minutes, if I've got to have a call with that particular person, I can probably be a really good human for 30 minutes. But if I sit next to them for 8 hours, I'm going to snap. And I know that that's my bad. But do you know what I mean? Like, that's the sort of stuff that I think people aren't talking about, is that you see the uncared for person, if that makes sense. You're not seeing the, I'm on camera, I've got to do this, I've got to show up in a certain way. You see all the things that, you know, the office politics, the ego, the criticising rather than contributing, all those things that aren't so nice. And I think people maybe don't always think about that, you know, when they think about, let's get everyone back to the office. But actually, is that helping productivity? Like, you just spent 20 minutes chatting about Debbie and finance. Do you know what I mean? There's work to be done. Like,
I mean, I guess there must be the flip side as well, and there could be a sort of certain closeness that you'd get from the physical proximity, but there's definitely both sides of that coin, isn't there?
Yeah, but you know what? We only talk about the great stuff, you know, and that's the thing, is I have no bias either way. I love being in the office. I love being at home. I love working from like coffee shops, anywhere. Like, you know, I'm a sado. I just love work, right? So it doesn't matter where I am. But it's like, let's have a proper conversation about all this stuff, because like, I'm saying it because, you know, I'm being open about it. But if you're working in a company, maybe you can't say that. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Can't say, I don't want to sit next to Debbie in finance. Do you know what I mean?
I suppose you've got the return to office drive, but that also comes with the office politics, right? That was always there, and it always still be there, because I suppose we are humans, I guess, and like to have a bit of a natter. But that's the concept, really. Well, what you need, Bex, is you need perhaps a good desk booking system, so you can select your desk so you're not near Debbie from finance.
Yeah, but what if Debbie from finance can see where I am? This is the problem.
Then anyway, you need to be able to have your favourites on display, and or even the ones you don't want to see, and then you can look and say, okay, Debbie's going to be in on Wednesday. I'll maybe just dodge it on Wednesday then.
Yeah. Do you know what? Somebody said to me the other day, they said, God, you've got such good energy. And I said, like, thank you. That's really lovely. I said, I don't feel like it. Like, I don't come in and start moaning and bringing people down. Like, I might feel like that inside, but it's like, you know, when you're around people who are positive, like, and I'm not saying toxically positive now, I'm just saying like people who are like go-getters, getting stuff done, really trying to make a difference, and just nice people. God, it makes you feel like amazing when you come to work. Do you know what I mean?
It does.
Like,
it really does, yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to, this kind of high performance, going back to that concept again. But, you know, you kind of have this, I don't know, if you have this cadence of bringing the team in on a certain day, you want to turbocharge everyone, get everyone motivated, inspired in person, kind of around these goals, and you build those relationships that then could be sustained online, I should say. So it's about trying to get that right balance right, and synchronizing everyone and creating the best of both, I guess. So, you know, there is an inherent challenge with that, to try and, you know, kind of align the stars and the planets around everyone's availability and making those moments that really matter. But that's kind of part of it, really, is to try to get the best of both. I mean, on that point, Bex, I mean, what would you suggest to anyone who, those leaders that are trying to, I suppose, align schedules, that kind of remote versus in office, getting everyone together? I mean, have you seen organisations that are doing that well? And if so, what do you take away from what they're doing?
Yeah, I think, do you know what I've loved about this? When people say they're doing, I don't know, 1 day a week in the office, let's say, as an example, deciding together what day they're going to do, but doing that a week in advance so that people can plan childcare, caring responsibilities, whatever it might be, that seems to actually work really well. Like, not always is it going to be the day you want to do, right? Like, if you've got Friday, you might be like, oh, I don't really want to go Friday. But then people, if they're having those moments like you've spoken about, Jo, where like you're together, you maybe go out for lunch or you have fun in the office, like that makes you want to come again the following week. Whereas when you're in the office every day, or you're doing it more often, everything becomes routine. So you don't necessarily get a coffee or chat to anybody, because you're like just heads down doing the work again. And then it goes back to that whole thing of like, I could be doing this at home. Why am I here? Whereas if it's like less often, it's almost like more special, and people care about it more. It's less routine. Like they say, don't they? This is like a bit of a funny one, but they say like your other half that you're living with, you just take them for granted because you see them every day. Like somebody might meet your like my tone. Someone might meet him in a bar and be like, he is amazing, like that, and I'd just be like, it's Tone. Do you know what I mean? Like, and like that happens in work as well, where you take people for granted and you see people every day and you just think. But do you remember when COVID first, like that lockdown happened and we got back into civilization? Do you remember how mad that was? Like, oh, I haven't seen you in ages, and silly little phrases like they were totally inappropriate, not meant in this way whatsoever. But I remember someone said, "Oh, you've got legs," to me, and I was like, it's probably not the right thing to say, but yes, like
I've said that a few times.
but you know what I mean? It was that moment of like, oh, like I can see you or I can hug you, or like but when you see people regularly, you just it becomes more transactional and less, I don't know what word it is I'm looking for, but
what you're describing there, what I hear is that trying to use those moments as much more of a human experience, right? You're trying to create something that you have that kind of shared experience, whether that's, you say, a team lunch or a get together, you know, something that has much more purpose than because I said so. And you just sat there on Teams calls on your desk. That's not good really for kind of anyone. So, I mean, that's the thing that we found, is trying to create these kind of reasons to collaborate in the office. So there might be an event going on that you want to join, or you can see that your team leader's coming in. You can plan your day around them, and trying to create these very subtle nudges to synchronize these schedules. And it's not around forcing people to do X, Y, and Z. It's just saying, hey, you know, these things are going on. Do you want to join? And so you create that bit of magnetism. And people can say, yeah, great, actually, I can see Bex and Jane are in. So, you know, I'm going to sort my schedules out, and I'll plan to have one less Teams call and meet you both for coffee. So, as you say, it's around, you know, creating that type of experience where you have a great time and you want to come back again. So I think someone said in the industry, I think it might have been Phil Kirshner, had said, no one goes to a bad restaurant twice.
So true. Yeah. And you know what? Like early days of the pandemic, I was at a conference and somebody said, your employee is now a visitor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So they're just visiting for the day. So you would treat them really nicely, right? How are you? How can I help? All of that. Your employee is now a visitor, but shouldn't your employee be your most important visitor every day anyway? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And that kind of transforming the way the type of spaces we're creating, the technology we're providing, the conditions of how people can operate and work within the space, it should be our number one priority. And it definitely shouldn't be something that's left for corporate real estate to do alone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem, is going back to that original part of our conversation around operating in silos and not being connected. You're not going to create the best product if you don't involve all the different people in the discussion around how it should operate, how it should work, etc. I'm on a contract at the moment, and we've done loads of work recently on explaining how real estate works. Like, I know that's really silly, but like, we've been in it for years. Like, we all know, we've done it. Mm-hmm. But if you're like a brand manager in an agency, you wouldn't know anything about real estate. It's just absolute mumbo jumbo. So all of the reporting that we do, and that's what I'm saying about, you know, the conversation around it, it's like a story. It's not like utilization is this, whatever, because they're going to be like, what the hell is utilization? You know? So
that is such an interesting point, because, you know, you walk into the boardroom as somebody who's familiar with all the CRE spacey stuff, and you're talking about utilization rates and occupancy and neighborhoods and ratios. Yeah. And that's just like a completely different language for the vast majority of people. And then if it's a completely different language, how do you drive alignment and create change and get clarity and make decisions and have influence? Because people aren't necessarily going to take the time to understand what you're talking about. It's that ability to tell almost the big picture story is something that's really important, and probably people are struggling with because they've got all this data and all this detail, and it's how have you seen people approaching that?
People here have been really, really responsive to it, because we've gone in and said, we're partners, we're here for you. Like, we want to show you how your little area is performing or whatever. And we've explained it all, and we've given detailed glossaries, but like not overkill glossaries basically, but just easy to understand. And it's worked really, really well. And you know what, when you explain to people that like one of the things on this account is you have to come in 2 Fridays of a month, basically, as part of your time in office. And people were like, I don't understand why we have to do that. Okay, so let me just show you like how your area is operating at the moment and how it's sat empty. And let me tell you how much that empty desk costs us every year. That's why we need you to spread it out so that you're not all coming in and then you've got a really bad experience or whatever it might be. They go, oh, get
Makes
it.
sense.
Get it. They're not going to be bothered about that, right? Because that's not their priority. That's our priority. So we need to understand their priorities. They need to understand our priorities. We need to meet in the middle. That's the thing. So I think making it more kind of mainstream, using appropriate language, getting everyone familiar around the same phrases as well, especially globally, because, you know, everybody uses a different term for something. Is it net internal area? Is it gross? What are we going to use? Like standardizing that and just getting everyone to speak the same language is really helpful in your own team. And then obviously, how does that transcend outside of your team into the rest of the office? You know, like show up rate as an example is one of the things I've brought in since I've been here, and that is how many people are we expecting to come in and how many of those are coming in. That's what they care about. They don't care about occupancy. Like, you know, so it's just trying to understand what are their drivers and how can our reporting or our impact that we have help them. Like what are their priorities and how can we support? I'm not sure whether other CRE teams are as integrated, maybe.
I mean, that show up rate's, I think, a great kind of stat, really. Certainly we've seen very useful, which is they're trying to actually even predict what we think the show up rate will be. Because obviously if we can track the occupancy over time, the model becomes much more informed in terms of on a typical Monday or Tuesday, this is what we're expecting. And then there's actually a part of that then that looks at on the day, actually, are we running above or below that trend line? So we thought the show-up rate was going to be X, but actually it's 10% below that. Why is that the case? Oh, there's a train strike. And it's almost like getting to the point of predicting, you know, what are the factors that are influencing occupancy. You know, occupancy is spiking on a Thursday. It's actually 25% above what we're expecting. And we're going to breach our fire regulations. So start to issue some alerts proactively to people. Why is that the case? Oh, because the CEO's in and we're doing a town hall.
Yeah.
So it's around trying to unpick what are the factors that are influencing occupancy so that then we can provide the right type of space for that engagement to happen. Because what you don't want to have is an office that is fully powered and it's empty, because that's obviously contributing to, you know, cost and obviously environmental cost there. But also, you know, you want to get the right level of vibrancy. So trying to have a bit of a predictive model around show-up rate is something that we've seen quite a lot really working with some of our customers.
It's so cool because also it drives like the experience as well, like in the sense of if you know roughly like on a Wednesday, the office I'm in today, Wednesdays are a bit more of a dip over the week. It's not the case in any of our other London locations, but it is here. So today there's like a careers fair that's happening. So I'm intrigued. How's that going to go? Because like I know that this is the day we usually have lowest occupancy. So are they going to suffer with that, or will it actually make more people come in and therefore drive occupancy? You know, so I won't be able to tell you what that answer is, but I'll be looking at all of that and getting these themes through so we can start to say, okay, that worked really well here. Other regions, think about it. Is it something you want to do or not do? But yeah, making sure that, again, when employees come in at home, they don't have a queue for the coffee machine, or, you know, they have their favourite coffee. So you're competing with that, whether you like it or not. So making sure that the providers that you have are ready to go for when there's going to be peak occupancy as well is really important, because there's nothing worse than, you know, you've got 9 o'clock meeting, you come in, you want to get a coffee and you're queuing and then you're missing your 9 o'clock start, or you're on your Teams whilst you're queuing, you know, and all of that. You don't get that at home, do you? So again, it's a friction that upsets the rest of your day. You've got to work hard to get back from that, like to improve that experience.
And God forbid you start at 9 o'clock meeting, you haven't had that coffee. What you're saying, Bex, is you'd rather be late, 10 minutes late with that coffee than start uncaffeinated.
I'm basically just sharing literally the priorities of my day, because coffee is definitely up there.
I'm with you 100%. But so it's just interesting as well, what you described there. You're having these sort of team level discussions that are driven by the data and showing people the rationale behind it. We're not just telling you randomly to do stuff. There's some rationale that we can share, and then we can understand. So there's that team level discussion, but then there's that boardroom level discussion, maybe influencing CRE influencing HR policies around hybrid work. Because I've had these horror stories of companies sort of really increasing their sharing ratios and dumping some space, and then suddenly there's a change of policy, and I know everybody's got to come in now. Well, there's not enough seats, and that surely is an alignment problem that's coming back to some sort of disconnect in seeing that data or telling the story of it.
Yeah, but again, I think this is why this conversation is so great, because we're going through everything on the cycle, but that's where those senior leaders sat in the boardroom need to say, we've looked at the data. If everybody comes back in with time in office as you're describing, we physically haven't got enough space. And if you make that decision, we'll make it work, but this is the situation, But if you're not brave enough as a leader sat in that room to not say, this could be a problem, everybody else would just go full steam ahead, right? And then you'll have that situation where people turn up and can't sit down at various spaces, or it's just overpopulated, etc. So I think having that really unemotional, factual, this is what the data says, this is what it could happen, and this is the impact, or this is even the rough cost of what the additional space required from what we know in terms of strategy would be. Have you budgeted for that? That's going to stop a CFO in their tracks when you say, well, actually, we need, however many thousands extra square meters, because this isn't going to work, Because let's be honest, why would they even know about your sharing ratio? Why would a CFO or a CEO know about sharing ratio? That's so in the weeds for them. So they're not going to understand how space works. Again, we're the experts. So unless we tell them and explain it and go through that whole process, they're not going to get it. So that patience, understanding, and communicating on a language that people understand is why it's so important to kind of counter whatever is happening at a senior level, if you need to, or supporting it if the data shows that, we can make that work. Why wouldn't we,
I mean, there's a really good example, actually, of it was a financial firm who had this exact same scenario you're describing, Bex, where the leadership were considering kind of putting more rigor around kind of getting people into the office, and it was a corporate real estate team that stood up and said, based upon what we see, we're going to hit the buffers, and we're not going to have enough space on a regular basis. And if you change this guidance, we're going to need 18 months at least to start to stand up new buildings. And that's based on everything all aligning. And we all know to stand up a new building can take you probably longer than 18 months to even find a space that's in London. I mean, you even saw this week, there was a report in the Times where one of the big occupiers can't find the quality space they need. So there is a shortage of the right type of space in the right place. And so, there are long-term kind of, tails to some of these decisions that can get made. And it's around, as you say, the corporate real estate team in that scenario had the data to back it up, to say, red flag here, if you do this, this happens. And so everyone had to stand out. But you've got to have the data there to make that argument and make that case. We've got a new guest on the podcast.
Oh, I love that.
A cat. He's in one of those moods. He's going to start walking on my keyboard.
The tail just coming along.
Pushing the end podcast button. And then I guess there's other scenarios as well as the sort where you have some companies just going crazy with loads of space. The OpenAI, how much space can we get our hands on? And then they must have a data challenge around how to fit that out and knowing what to do with that space to accommodate people in the right way. When, how do they know what the actual usage behavior will be like?
Yeah, this is a thing. But you know what? It's difficult, isn't it? It's like, if I think this is such a bad analogy, but I like handbags, right? I've got too many. I don't use them. I literally just have far too many handbags, and then I stick with the same one that I really like that goes with everything. Property's a bit like that as well sometimes. It's like you don't need as many buildings as you've got. Actually, if you look at the usage data, you look at the information that you have, you should be offloading it, in the nicest possible way. You should be a good corporate citizen and be going, actually, this is space we don't really need. Like, there's so many other options within corporate real estate now. You've got flex, you've got day passes, you've got, so people can get a space in their local neighbourhood or whatever. I think that, unfortunately, the industry, it's had people doing the same thing over and over again and making huge amounts of money out of it. And so therefore, people just kind of stick in the game. But actually, if you want to be a really good corporate citizen, I think you should be fragmenting your portfolio appropriately and doing the right thing. 14 people in one location, if you're a massive corporate, shouldn't have their own office. I mean, that is a bit mental,
Yeah.
They should have spaces where they can come together, obviously, but you don't need to take out a 5-year lease, 10-year lease for 14 people, when you're a massive corporate.
Yeah.
I mean, this topic came up in the roundtables where it said about 5 or 10-year leases. It was like, well, we don't even know what our market's going to look like in 10 years.
No.
So how on earth can we plan for something that far ahead? So the leases have been becoming much more shorter as a result, because there's just so much unpredictability at the moment with, obviously, the economy, but also the AI coming in. How much space will we need for how many people? We just don't know the answer to that question. So it's being much more agile on the short-term basis.
Yeah, and I think back to when I was in serviced offices and selling serviced offices. Like, that was the huge selling point right then, was like, people would come and say, I think we need a 5-person office, and then I'd work through and work out, no, you really need 3 desks, because we've got space outside where people can sit for the odd day where you're all in together or whatever. And you'd save, obviously, from the original brief, huge amount of money for the business. They know that then they can just upgrade when they need to in space, maybe not in that building if it's full, but another building. Like, there's a lot to be said for that flex market, which I think, again, has kind of in the past been kind of downgraded almost. Do you know what I mean? And it shouldn't. Like, people now say, one of the objections we always get actually here is people will say, oh, if I go to a flex, I won't have my own identity. Well, there's so many great providers out there that can also provide you with space that still has your same identity. But then you've got none of the risk that if you lose that business or whatever, you're stuck in a lease that you can't get out of, So, yeah, there's a lot to consider, isn't there, in terms of, like I said, brand, what you're trying to create and where your customers are, and deciding where your location is going to be, what it's going to look like, and everything that goes with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it does tie with the culture part of the equation as well, doesn't it? Because you talked about, people setting their hybrid policies and such, like, based on their values and looking at their brand. And so I wanted to ask you about culture, because it's such an amorphous thing. People define it in many different ways. For example, I've heard very smart people describe it as group behavior, which is something that you can absolutely influence. And then I've heard equally smart people describe it in terms of identity, like something that's there whether you like it or not. So, in your mind, first of all, what is culture? And in your experience, how far can we go in influencing and changing it in practical, real life companies? Because assuming leadership lobotomies aren't going to happen, if you're facing a culture where, say, quite top-down dictatorial behaviors are the norm, maybe there's overload, maybe there's burnout, maybe there's conflict that's not constructive. Where do you begin? Do you have to wait for people to retire, be fired, or die, or can you fix that? But and what's the role of space in all that? So yeah, what do you think culture is in your view, and then what might we be able to do to change it, and what role does space play?
I love this question because, like, I'm a bit obsessed with culture just generally. Like, I hear a lot where people say, oh, the culture of X organization must be this, it must be that, blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, every single team has a culture. So in a massive, global corporate company, there is no one homogenous culture. Every team is different. Every location is different. And you go to another location, it'll feel completely different. So culture is really like a mix of everybody that's there. So the individuals that come in, how do they contribute towards the culture? And I always say that the culture of your organization is how people feel on a Sunday night when they're thinking about going to work on a Monday.
Love that.
And if you actually ask your employees that, and you could do it anonymously, you could, so that there's no way of tracking, and I mean no way of tracking, that would give you an inkling as to whether you need to do something about it or not. Because if people are feeling sad or scared or anxiety or Sunday scaries, then your culture isn't something that you want. And then when you think about okay, this is where we are today. How are we going to get to this new culture? Well, actually, what is this new culture that we want to see? So again, what does good culture look like to you as an individual? And does it then marry up with the values that we have? So if you're a healthy business, let's say, and nobody's exercising that works for you, you've got a culture imbalance there. That's not right. The brand's saying this, but no one here is doing what the brand says. And who's holding people accountable? Every single company has these values on a wall somewhere or whatever it might be. How many live up to them? And some of the work that I actually do on this is we make the values together as a team. So they all decide as a team, right, what are the values going to be? But then this is the bit that people don't like. We then assess each person against those values. So if we say our value is work-life balance, let's say, as one of them, then I want someone in my team to turn around to me and say, Bex, do you know what? You haven't had work-life balance and I'm calling you out for it. Mm-hmm. That unhealthy peace situation we described before wouldn't work in this scenario. This is why you need people to feel free to speak, to be brave, to do all of that. Because in my prior team at Nike, one of my team members, I was the manager or the director there, one of my team members said that to me and I had to say, you're absolutely right. That's it. I'm going to have to be better. And then it's like, okay, you're going to have to be better, but what are you going to do? What's your plan for the next month? Because in a month, guess what? We're going to sit down, we're going to have the same conversation again. Yeah. Like, do you know what I mean? But all of this stuff takes time and energy. How are you going to do all of that if your day is based on getting out reports, attending pointless meetings, like doing all this stuff that's noise and nonsense, but not driving change? Change comes when people feel part of something bigger and feel like they can contribute to it. So if a manager said something that's inappropriate and they can actually say to that manager, like, I didn't like this, this is the reason why. And the manager just goes, I understand. Thank you for telling me. And I'm going to come back to you. I don't have the answers now, but I'm going to come back to you in a couple of days with how we can make things better. And I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Because as a leader, you always make mistakes. Yeah. You always say things that you're not meaning it in the way that it's said. Mm-hmm. But if you were to take that as like, well, I didn't mean it that way, you're not creating that environment where people are going to speak up more and kind of be free. So, yeah. So on the culture piece, I think you can definitely co-create it. And also, I always say this, but I guess I am a bit of a Pollyanna, but you can change a culture. One person can change a culture. All you've got to do is find someone else that thinks the way you think and suddenly start to influence. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can suddenly start to influence. And I've seen really bad leaders or really bad teams completely transformed just by somebody new coming in sometimes who just goes, this is rubbish. I'm not putting up with that, So there's that lovely video actually of a man who's just on a hill somewhere and he starts dancing and everyone's like, what a weirdo, like all judgy, like everybody's looking at this poor guy, he's just dancing. And then some other lady jumps up, she's like two of them boogieing away like on a hill randomly. And then all of a sudden that whole field, like obviously over time, the whole field is jamming out there. Do you know what I mean? So like, don't look at someone doing something differently and go, oh, they're odd or they're weird. Think about, like, be curious and be like, maybe that's what we could all be doing. We could all be doing things differently, I'll have to find that video to send it to.
I know the video you mean. It's at some festival in America. I can't remember which one it is now. But it's the guy, almost people were kind of like laughing at him to start with. Oh, look at this guy on his own. And suddenly all these people join. Everyone's like, oh, let's join him as well. It creates that herd mentality.
So which of you guys, Joe and Bex, were any of you the first on the dance floor?
Oh, do you know what? Not back in my days of drinking, absolutely not. No. But now that I don't need drink to be able to dance, I could be up there now first because I'm just shameless now, basically. Nice. Yeah.
I like how you stopped drinking alcohol and became shameless. That's impressive.
Yeah. Weird though, that whole thing of the alcohol, because that was like a massive like crutch for me in terms of confidence, right? Because I've always like lacked a bit of self-confidence. It was like a huge crutch. Then when it went, I was like, this is all a bit boring. Like after 6 months, I was a bit bored with it all. And then I realized, I don't actually need it. Like my life could be completely different. Like I could be doing all these other stuff. And it was all very strange. And I said to my mum about it the other day, like I did something the other day in the office and I thought, that wasn't appropriate. Like I can't even remember what it was. It was something like a bit wild, like, and I would never have done that before, but it's just that I don't need anything to like get excited. I don't know.
That's
very
cool.
odd. Yeah,
Very cool.
very odd. You can cut that bit out, by the way. That was absolute nonsense.
I enjoyed it. Oh, we're nearly running out of time. I can't believe how quickly it's gone.
So good. But I knew it was going to be good because I love both of you so much. So I was like, I know that it's going to be amazing.
Thanks so much, Bex. It was great. I took down copious notes, to be honest, because it's just, so many highlights in there, really. The kind of what is culture, how you feel on a Sunday night going into Monday. How many organisations, if they asked that question anonymously, would be scared of the answers? And doesn't that say a lot, really?
Yeah, I love that too. That was a good takeaway, and I love your views on productivity. I think that's very refreshing. We can get so obsessed with this productivity thing and forget the pacing and forget the tapering, and that if you've just done this big thing, you need to have that rest, or you do get in that crazy place where shoes are the end of the world, and that's not good for anyone.
Yeah, you know what? It's such a weird thing, but I think it's that whole so I was listening to a podcast this morning about midlife, right? So this is a bit random, but he was saying how when you get sort of into your 50s, it's unraveling of everything that people can say you're going to have a meltdown, it's like a crisis, blah, blah, blah. But this guy was saying, no, it's an unraveling. All the things you've been told, all the things that you think were what you should have been trying to do, all unravels to actually make somebody who's enough of all of this. I'm just going to do the things that bring joy, bring me satisfaction and all of that. It's the pressure somehow goes, I don't know, but why wait till that period of your life to be able to live like that, without aspiring to always go to the next thing. I've had to do a lot of work to understand that the journey is as important as the destination. Yeah, I didn't get that. It was all about the next job, the next, I don't know, if I was playing bowls, which was my sport, I want to get to play for my country, I want to be in my county. It was all about ticking off this list of, And so I think that's why I have this view of productivity versus performances. Performances I'm doing all of this stuff really, really well, but I'm not losing myself in it. In fact, I can show everyone else the better version of myself because I'm less busy and because I have more time and space to actually think, rather than jumping from one meeting into the next meeting and feeling guilty really inside that you haven't had time to read whatever the pre-read was, or, and then freestyling. How many times do you do that where you're freestyling what you should have already prepared for, So I don't really want to live my life like that. I'd like to be more intentional with every part of it. And and bigger than that, we're only here for such a short space of time. It's just, I
know you're a big reader of the Stoics, Bex, and it's almost like you're reading Ryan Holiday's book there. I can almost hear the words coming out really around, I'm going to butcher the quote now, but everyone has two lives. The second life begins when you realise you only have one. It's having a focus on the today, on the present moment. And if you're not present, then you've lost that moment forever. It's gone. So that intentionality you're describing there, that's absolutely something that I think everyone can strive to do more, really.
Yeah.
It's almost a process of just becoming more yourself. More yourself.
Unbecoming all the stuff that you were never in the first place, I think that's it. It's if you're brought up in a really good household and you've got good values, good moral compass, you do a lot of things out of duty and out of loyalty and all that other stuff, and it doesn't, yes, it can help you get to wherever you might need to go or whatever, but you're losing yourself when you're agreeing to do things you don't want to do because you just don't want to upset the other person. You kind of lose yourself in that, oh yeah, I'll take that call at 10 o'clock because I'll take that call at 10 o'clock. But then the funny thing is when you're that person in a company or an organisation, the minute you step out of line, you get it in the neck, right? You're the one that, Bex, she didn't show up for that. One meeting out of 100 I might not have shown up for, but suddenly I'm called out, yet everybody else hasn't showed up at any meetings for months. Do you know what I mean? So it's that whole thing of making sure that everything you're doing intentionally, you're doing it with heart, and you're trying to leave things better than how you might have got them originally. That's all you can do, isn't it? And keep perspective. a manager at Nike who was amazing, so inspirational to me. He said, don't worry for 5 minutes about something you're not even going to remember in 5 years. Like, why do we do it to ourselves? Like, I don't know. And we wouldn't do it to a friend. We wouldn't say the things we say to ourselves to a friend.
Definitely not. Mm-hmm. Well, it's been excellent, Bex. I love that you have that your growth mindset and your willingness to let things go and become more of yourself and just have that evolution through your life and your career and how you do things. I think it'll be very inspiring to people. And I really appreciate your time today. I've really enjoyed it. And I think that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Visionaries. So a huge thanks to Bex Moorhouse for such an engaging chat, loads of valuable insights. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to share it with someone you might know someone who's trying to reshape the future of work. I'm Jane Young. I'm here with Joe Harris. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on Workplace Visionaries. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Bex.